I'm practicing how cases against cults and cult leaders. And the law does not always, in fact, in this case, does not give us many tools to do that. And so we are practicing all the time how to get accountability for those people who wish to go through the legal process. Now, I'm talking about civil law. The US system has two kind of pathways. One is civil, one is criminal. Anybody here in my session last year in Louisville? Okay, so we talked about that. I won't go through it again, but basically civil is at the end of it, a jury says these people, this organization is liable and they're going to pay you money for the harm that they caused you. And in the criminal side, somebody goes to jail if they are found guilty. So I'm a civil lawyer. So in addition to be practicing lawyer, I used to be a recovering lawyer, which meant that I hated litigation. I just really hated it. And so I began doing investigations and training. That's okay, come in. I did training and investigations in sexual misconduct in the workplace in the United States for corporations. And I used to introduce myself then as a recovering lawyer, and as a lawyer who's not practicing. Then I actually retired, and I thought, well, the next step is completely, totally recovered. But apparently that isn't possible because I'm still here. And now I've gone back to litigation again, representing clients who have been in cults and who have been harmed by being sexually assaulted. It's a very narrow kind of a trench to be in. All right, so when I started doing this PowerPoint, there's a person in our office, in our law office, that helps lawyers who are kind of perennially challenged technologically. He helps us to put slides together. So he said to me, do you want to do a sizzle reel? And I was like, I don't know. That doesn't sound good to me. Lawyers are suspicious for good reason. And then he said, no, it's like 3 slides that captures everything that you've said publicly during the last couple of years. And so I thought, well, okay, let's do that. And there's a list of some of the podcasts that I've done. Is Diana here? Yeah, did your podcast. Thank you. Very helpful to be in those conversations. And so I thought, okay, so fighting cults, here's another, this is, various media, cult assassin, that was very, my children found that, kind of humorous. And then, again, more media. And I thought, there's a lot of talk. That's a lot of language for the past 2 years. And what is it that we have learned? Well, one of the things is that there's different content. So, for example, some of my cases are Buddhist cases. So if you're like me, when I first encountered this, I was like, what? Buddhists? How can that be? But it can. They can be a cult like anybody else. And their doctrine, their dogma, their religion is different than yoga or Hindu or some of the Christian evangelical kinds of cults. But no matter what the content is, what I can say is that from where I sit, coercive control is the thread that runs through all of them. Psychological, whatever. So these are some of the things from your bite model, which we use with our clients to help them recognize coercion. And so there are many more. They dictate your life choices. They require absolute loyalty. In my cases, it doesn't matter whether you're Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, or what I think of as the off-brand kinds of cults, which are like the true path to eternal light. Does anybody know that particular one? No, because I made it up, but it sounds
It's almost a symbolic system.
you could kind of see that, I used to think that I could identify it just by the names, if you look at the names sometimes, but then I would have missed Keith Raniere, who was like executive success program, and so that wasn't it. But if coercive control is the thread and the heart of the code, then it is such a powerful weapon against people. It is used against all of the people that are clients of ours have had this coercion used against them. And what we need, and I hope that's what we gain from one another when we're at a conference like this, is that we need powerful tools to hold those cults accountable. And there's no silver bullet, I fear. It takes a lot of different kinds of angles to get at it. But what I want to talk about today is the way that the law looks at it. And maybe in looking at what the law that I'm going to talk about today, which is the Trafficking Act, the U.S. Federal Trafficking Victims Prevention Act. Is that right? I lost it there. I call it TVPA so many times that I've kind of lost the individual words. But it is a law that is aimed at what, of course, it says, which is trafficking. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear the word trafficking, I am thinking about people crossing the border. But it's not there in the laws. It does not have to, people do not have to be moved across the border under the US law to have this law be a kind of powerful tool for us. So how do we overpower some of that coercive control of the cults? What have you done? Have you been in association with people who've been in cults or you've read about cults? What do we do to overpower them? Speak out?
All of that.
Yeah, all of that. I have done all of that. So I have spoken out against them and had other people spoke out against them. I've had media speak out against them. Go back to the sizzle reel and you'll see 2 years of podcast media, documentaries. Have you seen The Vow? Yeah. So there we have documentaries. I have about 10 different documentary filmmakers who are interested in doing a documentary on one or another of my cases. Of course, none of them are able to get the money, so we don't know whether that's ever going to be, but there are documentaries. There are reasonable letters to the board. So this was my first approach. This was when I was still practicing, I guess. I was like, you people need to kind of look alive here. Like, you've got some bad things going on. And in my naive mind, if I tell you what they are, you will surely want to correct it. So this came out of years of working in corporate America, not exactly the highest bastion of morality. But if you said to them, oh, the guy in the copy room, he's actually raping women. I mean, there would be a fire drill. But the reasonable letters to the boards usually got things like, okie dokie then, and then they would go away and nothing would happen. Threatening letters to the board for those organizations that had a board. And of course, later I learned what the problem is that everyone on the board has taken an oath of loyalty to the leader who is the person who is doing the assaulting. So threatening letters didn't work. Calls to the FBI didn't work. Appeals to politicians. Lisa, are you here? Yeah. So you've talked with politicians. It's a hard, long pull to get people interested.
Times are changing though. They're enthusiastic to pass legislation.
I'm happy to hear about that in Oregon. And for all of you who are involved in this space, this is a little bit like, what can we do now? what can we do? What are the tools that we have? If you were in the session prior where the psychologists were and they were presenting their data and the PowerPoint didn't work. Yes, okay, so Jill said, we hope this is going to be helpful. And it is. It is. For us as lawyers, we're not psychologists. But when we have to take these cases to trial, what we are is that we are educators. And we are educating 12 people. And we don't know who they are. And so we have to be tapped into the data, to the studies, to the language. I mean, my notebook is filled with words that people have said that I feel would resonate with a judge or a jury that help us to form our argument. So all of these pieces work together. Those of you who are psychologists, who among you are psychologists. So everything that you're doing, here's what I know. My clients cannot go through litigation without therapy, right? But they've come out of cults where they've worked 7 days a week, 14 hours a day for no pay. And so they have no money. That's a terrible dilemma, that we kind of have to solve. So these are all ways in which we can think about what can we do moving forward to really get our act together and put pressure on the points where we need pressure. So one of the things that comes to me after having been through all of those is that maybe we should create laws on coercion that hold cults accountable, that we should use that as a way to get some traction in the legal system. So I want to show you a case study. This is like a combination of a lot of different clients that we have, and I call it Rose and the True Path. So this is like the full name is, of course, the legal name is the True Path to Eternity. We'll just shorten it to the True Path. All right, so Rose joins the True Path. This is her story. She's young. She's had a somewhat rocky childhood. One parent was an alcoholic. Father died when she was young. Had a little bit of alcohol abuse, but went into a rehab program. She's 19. And interestingly enough, what she told me is when you are 19, you don't know what your own personal agency is. And therefore, it's very easy for them to take it away from you. It's why a lot of young people have difficulty with this. Okay, so Rose goes there. It's actually a spiritual retreat center. It's a Buddhist center. And first time she goes, there's a lot of love bombing. There's a lot of you're fabulous, you're special, you need to come and live here with us because we have our teacher has the answer. He has the way to enlightenment. And that's, no matter what you call it, that's what's being sold. It's kind of a way to a better life. You want to be a better person. You want to have more peace in your life. You don't want to suffer. It all lies in that. So the love bombing means that Rose, in fact, does stay there. She goes and she lives there. And she is living in isolation, physical, as well as kind of social, because everyone around her is a member of the cult. So they all believe the same thing. So she has long working hours. This is another thing that I find that is kind of emblematic of the cults that I'm dealing with, is that people are working long hours for nothing. So she's working long hours for nothing. And eventually, of course, you don't have any money at all because you're not making any money. Then the cruelty starts. And so I'm sure those of you who are in the psychology space can explain why the love bombing and the cruelty create a kind of adhesive almost. It's like, okay, now I want to try to get back to the love bombing that I had before. And so I am going to go double down on this. I am really going to be as good as the guru wants me to be. And then, so that I can get back to the love bombing. So the love bombing comes up every once in a while, but there's more cruelty than there is love bombing. One of my clients said that the reason we were telling her that eventually in a deposition, another lawyer, not us, is going to say to her, but why didn't you say no? Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you scream? That was the E. Jean Carroll case, right? Why didn't you scream? It's not rape if you don't scream. And she said, which I thought was really, really interesting. She said, because it was more dangerous saying than it was to give in. And I said, what kind of danger? She said, 10,000 prostrations in the snow in January.
Oh my God.
Loss of community, thrown out with no place to live. These are all psychological and physical dangers that we have a long way to go with the law actually recognizing. Okay, so she takes a vow. And this happened, if you saw the vow, then of course you know that vow. And most of them are the same. In my world, they're the same. You vow that this person is infallible and that you will obey everything that they say. And implicit in that is that not only will you obey it, but if you think that it's harming you, it's because you need more work on enlightenment. How about another 10,000 prostrations in the snow in January? Right? It's you that's at fault. And so this builds up the goal, enlightenment. And then ultimately, at a certain point, the guru says to Rose, it's important for you on your path to enlightenment to divest yourself of all your material goods. And so Rose gives him $350,000 that was an inheritance that she had from her grandmother, who was an immigrant and who left that money to her so that she would be able to get an education and to do better than other members of her family. Okay. Common story. Have you heard this story before? Yeah, right. Okay, so this is what I want to ask you. This is the part where you all become lawyers. Now you may say, how could I become a lawyer in 45 minutes? But actually I could do it in 3 seconds because the answer to everything is it depends. Others go to law school and they learn 3 years. I'm looking at Sahej because he works in my office. He's going to go to law school and he's interested in this area of the law and he will learn to say it depends. It takes us longer, apparently, to learn that. You can learn it in much less time. Are there any legal remedies now available to Rose? So if I take you back, she joins the true path. She's love bombed. She lives in isolation, long working hours, cruelty, vow, enlightenment, gives money. Legal remedies. What do you think? Okay, a possibility. That's a very good possibility. Sometimes what we run into is that it's not enough. You know, Robin, you talked this morning about the labor side of it, and I was very interested in the example that you gave. People whose passports are taken away, people who are in closed and barbed wire. You know, again, we get to some of the voluntary nature of some of this stuff. But we would look at that. We would want that. Anything else? Undue influence. Yes, but no. Because there really isn't much in the law about undue influence. As you may know or remember, if you're an American, today is the 4th of July. It is Independence Day. It is a value that is drummed into people's heads so that as a society, we believe very much in independence and free will. And so if you were unduly influenced, well, whose fault is that? That's kind of That's the way the law looks at it. We would love that. And there are little bits of things that are coming together on that. Anything else? Any other remedies? Another very difficult battle under the law, right? We're going to have our client declared incompetent by a court, which is, most people don't prefer that. And so, that's it. But yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. That's getting at where we're trying to go, isn't it? Breach of contract. Tell me the contract. Maybe even fraud. Okay? Fraud is good. But wait.
Intentional.
This is good for lawyers in 45 minutes. What's the problem with fraud, do you think? So what's the fraud? Enlightenment. And that's the fraud.
Right.
Right. I believed that too. That's why I'm a practicing lawyer. Because what I learned was that in the United States, there is a tremendous amount of wiggle room afforded to religions. When you say fraud, what would you have to prove, do you think? You see, you're all very competent lawyers. What do you have to prove in Rose's case to prove fraud?
You have to prove intent to defraud, right, on behalf of the guru. What if the guru actually believed that you could provide enlightenment? Then it's not fraud. You have to prove, I imagine, that you can get the thing that you have to attain enlightenment.
Yes.
You have to actually be able to get the thing that was promised.
So here's how the judge does. The judge sits up here on this, and the judge says, okay, so I have to decide whether it was fraud that Rose was promised, or even breach of contract, by the way, whether it was fraud or a breach of contract that Rose was promised enlightenment and Rose is saying that she didn't get it. What is the religion going to say? You don't get to decide that. In the United States, you don't get it. I'm talking to the judge, you, judge, cannot entangle yourself with a religious belief. It would be like if I came to court and I said, I want to sue the Christians for fraud because they promised me that Jesus walked on water. But when I tried to walk on water, I almost drowned. Right? They're not going to let you do that. So you see what the problem is.
Right.
No fraud.
Right.
No breach of contract. Anything else? Yes. Anything else? What about the money? Does she have any recourse about the money? Many people who come to me, I had a man come to me last week. He said, I have given this foundation called working man, not a rich man, $500,000 of my money over the years, and I want to get it back. Well, it doesn't support it. Potentially, yes. And I should have put on my list, the list of people that I've spoken to about costs is the IRS. Because honestly, the IRS, I don't know, those of you who are not Americans, but we had a very famous gangster whose name was Al Capone. He did so many things. He was killing people and he was, like all of this. But guess who brought him down? The IRS. Yeah, and so just think about it. If you follow the money, the IRS might be a good way to go. But the IRS, interestingly enough, is not interested. They're only interested and they have very, very little enforcement. So potentially they could be interested if you were not using the money for the purpose, right, that you're getting it. But other than that, they don't really care. So if I call the IRS and I say, hello, I have these people, they're a 501c3, they say they're a religion, they're taking money and they're raping people. They're like, yeah, well, what about the money that they're doing? They're not interested in the other. It's not in their, it's like your session today about the silos, right? Their silo is the money. And as long as you are doing something with it, then they don't care. But what's the difference between the NRA and the
They're not
Path
a
to
religion.
Eternal Light?
They're not a religion.
Small fish, right?
Oh,
NRA is a big
And there's
fish.
no political.
It's a big headline. It's a big political. Okay, anything else? Anything else about the money? There is no recourse about it. So at this point, even if Rose left, she would not have much recourse against the cult. Okay, now we did that. Now, what happens next is that after Rose is there for a while, the guru tells her a couple of things. One thing that he tells her is that she really needs to have special empowerments. And those empowerments are so important that most people pay a lot of money to get them to go to programs and be, have some, I don't know if they get a certificate or what they get at the end of it, but they become, it's not unlike Teach Mary and the multi-marketing scheme. You do this and you have to do the next thing and the next. Okay, so Rose, he tells Rose, most people pay for these empowerments, they cost money, and you need them in order to proceed on the path to enlightenment. Because if you're not proceeding on the path, then what's going to happen to you is that you're going to have to leave. Because basically everybody here has taken the vow that they will obey me. So Rose says yes. And of course he says to Rose, but for you, it's free. Guess what it involves?
Sex.
Yes, sex. It involves sex. And so in the beginning, Rose is not really clear about what is happening to her. So she's been told, and we've heard a lot about the psychological basis of coercion in this just one day that we've been here. And so we know, don't we? We know that she can't say no. It's more dangerous to say no than it is to give in. But the challenge is to make those 12 people on a jury believe that. And that is it is definitely an uphill challenge. So she begins, as she gets sicker and sicker, she begins to ask about the empowerments, like, I've agreed to this, but what does it really mean? What is happening? And she becomes ill. I really think that if any of you have read The Body Keeps the Score, this is when we are at war, with this cognitive dissonance that we have. This is how it came out of her. So she's ill. And then what happens is she's not useful for that 7-day-a-week, 14-hour-a-day labor. And she's asking questions. How do they feel about questions? None at all. Right. That's one of the, kind of indicators of a cult. And so she is forced. So the question is, here. She picks up the broken pieces of her life. She moves on. She actually goes on to do a lot of very interesting things, get her degree, even without the money that her grandmother had left her. And she gets a master's degree. She moves on. And then 9 years later, a woman who was in the same lineage of Buddhism met her and they were talking. And she told that woman the story for the first time. And the woman said to her, that wasn't an empowerment. It was, she did not know that. And I think that those of us in this room at this conference can understand how that can be. Okay, so then the question is, are there any legal remedies now? Now we've had the special empowerments. What about under criminal sexual assault laws? Every state has laws that says you can't sexually assault. What about those
statute
laws?
of limitation?
Statute of limitations.
Exactly. She's outside the statute of limitations.
And witnesses.
Yeah, so witnesses, we could work with no witnesses, because what we would do and what we do do is, and it's one of the things that I want to encourage all of you to think about helping with, is that other people who have left the cult come forward. And they are corroborating witnesses, right? They are telling the same story. So even though we don't have anybody who was there, we have other people who say, it's the same thing that happened to me. So, but most states have very short statutes of limitations on sexual assault. And so that's a problem. 9 years later, criminal sexual assault. Here's another problem with criminal sexual assaults. First, you have to go to the police. What happens when you go to the police?
They don't believe you.
That's right. What they say to you is, and Rose did eventually go to the police, because actually she was within a 10-year statute of limitations for sexual assault, criminal justice. She went to the police and they told her two things. Number one, you consented. You didn't leave, you didn't leave. And number two, it's a religion. And so we can't do anything about it. But that's the criminal justice system, right? So she might be under, and she was, but the criminal justice system refused to pick it up for those two reasons. How about under civil sexual assault laws? Same thing, right? Statute of limitations, often shorter. In the United States, we're seeing a move toward either lengthening statutes of limitations, lengthening it for children. And you have to ask yourself, what's the difference between somebody who's 17 years and 11 months old and somebody who's 18? You know, very little. And because we don't recognize how much time it takes to process this. This is where those of you who are in the psychological space help us. We need to know. We're the people who are collecting this information from all of these disciplines for those of you who are here and saying to a jury, look at this study. It can take 30 years. I have a client who was raped in 1969. And she's just coming forward. Part of that is because she actually came forward in 2019. But another thing that's happening in statutes of limitations is that the states like New York, like California are saying, okay, let's have a big 1-year party where we let anybody bring their case in, no matter when it happened. And that's what this woman did. When I interviewed her, I said, you know, it's not necessary that you'd be able to tell me the exact date that this happened. And she said, oh, I know the exact date. It was the year that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. Oh, I'm like, oh, geez, I'm probably the only person in here that remembers that. But that's how long ago. And we've taken her case and we're going to go to trial. So does it make a difference if the colors of religion? Yes,
Yeah.
It does. It's not the end of the story, but it's just like if you're running the hurdles races, you know, you watch them run down the track and they jump over those things. That's what we have to do. And the more things we have to jump over, the harder that it is. And so it just becomes another obstacle. But what I want to show you is the Federal Human Trafficking Act, and called the TVPA. So here's what it tells us. And I want you to look at it because it does a couple of things. Number one, it has a 10-year statute of limitation and none for children if they were in time in like 2021. So it's a little bit complicated, but basically going forward, no statute of limitations, 10 years for adults. Hopefully, one of the places that we can put pressure on politicians is to extend that also, that there's no limit to the time. And so 10-year statute of limitations, here are the basic elements of it. Knowingly recruited or enticed. Does that fit, Rose? Yes. If you can show that this has been going on over time, which is the case in Rose's case, actually, then it's knowing. They knew when they recruited those, they knew when they enticed those, that they were going to use fraud or coercion. And then the part about the sex is called a commercial sex act. It's very confusing because it doesn't have to do with commercial law. It has to do with something of value. Okay, and so we took this case, and this is also the practicing that I mentioned before. We did exactly what, which is that we said, oh, fraud. But then we talked with other people who had already practiced, and they said, no, you can't use fraud, but you can use coercion. And so we were able to make her case within the 10 years using coercion. The quid pro quo for sex is like, you did sex for something. Well, in Rose's case, what it is she was told you have to do this in order to keep her job. She was dusting relics. And what they said is you cannot dust relics unless, unless you have these special encounters. So she got the ability, that was the quid pro quo. And so we stay away from fraud, we go with coercion. We use the bite model and we have her identify all the ways in which she was coerced. And so it gives us a way, if you look at it, love bombing, part of coercion, isolation, insular community, long working hours. Even if we can't get the forced labor, we can get that this breaks down. This is coercive. You know, people are exhausted and, you know, they're kind of not in a good mental state. The cruelty, the vow, we just leave out enlightenment. You know, when you look at our pleadings, it doesn't look like, it looks like this was like the YMCA instead of a Buddhist lineage, because we just stay right away from the religious part of it. And so you can see that she was enticed, she was recruited, and that she was having commercial sex. That fits the definition of the TVPA. Now, Congress probably did not think about cults when they passed that law. But what they did say, and that the courts have taken to heart, is we intend for this to be applied very broadly. And so when the court, lots of cases where, well, not lots maybe, but some where the defendants have said, but this wasn't the intention of the law. Harvey Weinstein, he got trapped up in the TVPA. When I saw that, I was like, Harvey Weinstein, did he carry women across state lines? Was he a trafficker? No. But this law fit him. He recruited or he enticed actresses to have commercial sex. That is, have sex with me, I will get you an interview with a reporter. And the best thing about the TVPA is that there is no consent. Coercion takes consent off the table. So where we're looking at the sexual assault laws that we talked about, there's an issue of, did she consent? It looks like consent to people. She didn't scream. She didn't walk away. Because coercion is not in the picture. As soon as coercion is in the picture, then there is no issue of consent. It can't be raised as a defense. So this is all to say to you all, as you are going out, doing the roles that you have and the disciplines that you're coming from, is that this is where, from the legal perspective, we need to go further with. We need to have more laws, and that not just cover sex, right? It covers financial abuse. They cover emotional abuse, psychological abuse due to coercion. There's no reason that we can't have that, or at least not in my mind. And so that's a place we want to go. So other obstacles, statutes of limitations, 10 years isn't even enough. We know that. So we're able to take the work that those of you in the psychology field are working on to say, this is why we need more time. We go to our legislators, we try to get that. Money and lawyers. I have 13 cases on contingency. You know what that means? In 2 years, you gotta front the money, the law firm has to front the money for people like me and Sahaj and other lawyers and other legal analysts, because these cults do not want to settle, because they have a vested interest in their guru. And so you've got to find somebody who's either got a deep pocket of a law firm, but when we can't take all the people who are out there, we can only take a narrow subset of people. So people come with us. What are the obstacles? Statute of limitations. Also the assets of the organization, right? If the organization doesn't have assets, we're not going to put somebody through the years of litigation in order to figure that out. And then finally, therapy for survivors. Nobody can go through litigation. It is not an easy path to take without having therapy. So finding ways where we can get grants or money or therapy for people who do want to take this route and who have a case. Okay, questions? I know we're out of time, so yes.